Money isn't born when it's created. Money is born when someone is willing to exchange it. On May 22nd, 2010, somewhere in Jacksonville, Florida, a software developer was thinking about lunch. He wasn't trying to change the financial system. He wasn't trying to make history. He was simply hungry. His name was Laszlo Hanyecz. At the time, Bitcoin had existed for more than a year. Programmers could mine it. Developers could send it. Enthusiasts could collect it. But there was one thing nobody had ever done. Nobody had used Bitcoin to buy something in the real world. To most people, Bitcoin was still nothing more than an interesting experiment. A few days earlier, Laszlo had posted an unusual message on the Bitcoin Talk forum. He offered 10,000 Bitcoin to anyone willing to order him 2 large pizzas. It sounded ridiculous. Why would anyone trade real food for digital coins that almost nobody believed had value? 4 days later, someone accepted the offer. 2 pizzas arrived at Laszlo's door. 10,000 Bitcoin changed hands. It looked like an ordinary lunch, but it became the first real-world commercial transaction in Bitcoin's history. The pizzas were easy to understand, but the Bitcoin? Why was Laszlo willing to give away 10,000 of them? A currency has no value until someone is willing to trade something real for it. Before Bitcoin could change the world, it first had to answer a much simpler question. Could anyone actually use it? By early 2010, Bitcoin had already survived its first year. The software was running. New blocks were being mined. A small community of programmers exchanged ideas every day on the Bitcoin Talk forum. They discussed code. They reported bugs. They suggested improvements. Some mined Bitcoin simply because they found the technology fascinating. Others believed Satoshi Nakamoto might have invented something extraordinary. But outside that small community, almost nobody had heard the word Bitcoin. It wasn't listed on financial websites. Banks ignored it. Newspapers rarely mentioned it. Governments had no reason to pay attention. Bitcoin existed, but only inside computers. It could be mined. It could be sent from one wallet to another. It could be stored. But none of those things proved it was money. Throughout history, every form of money had earned trust because people exchanged it for something valuable. Gold could buy food. Silver could pay wages. Paper money could purchase almost anything. Bitcoin had never done that. It had no shop, no marketplace, no restaurant, no customer, no price tag. It was a brilliant invention, still waiting for its very first real-world purpose. That was the challenge facing Bitcoin in the spring of 2010. Not whether the technology worked, but whether another human being would accept it in exchange for something real. One programmer believed the only way to answer that question was to stop talking about Bitcoin and start spending it. Every revolution begins with one person willing to try something everyone else believes is impossible. Laszlo Hanyecz wasn't trying to become famous. He wasn't trying to become rich. And he certainly wasn't trying to create one of the most famous stories in Bitcoin history. He simply wanted to answer one question. Could Bitcoin actually buy something? On May 18th, 2010, Laszlo opened the Bitcoin Talk forum. Instead of discussing software, he wrote an unusual message. He offered 10,000 Bitcoin to anyone willing to order him 2 large pizzas. He even explained what he wanted: 2 large pizzas, maybe with onions, maybe with peppers, maybe sausage. No strange fish toppings, nothing fancy. Just enough pizza to have leftovers for the next day. It sounded like an ordinary request, but hidden inside that message was one extraordinary idea. Laszlo wasn't really buying pizza. He was testing Bitcoin. If someone accepted the offer, Bitcoin would become something entirely new. Not just software, not just code, not just numbers on a computer screen. It would become a medium of exchange, a form of money. The post stayed online. Hours passed, then a day, then another. Nobody accepted. Not because pizza was difficult to find, but because nobody knew whether 10,000 Bitcoin was worth anything at all. The world wasn't rejecting the pizza. It was questioning Bitcoin itself. Then, 4 days after the post appeared, someone finally said yes. Every market begins. The moment two strangers agree on value. Laszlo's message remained on the forum. 1 day passed, then another. Nothing happened. To most people, the offer made no sense. Why spend real money to buy pizza for a stranger in exchange for digital coins with no established value? There were no exchanges, no price charts, no investment funds, no guarantee that Bitcoin would ever become anything. The offer slowly disappeared beneath newer discussions. It looked as though the experiment had failed. But then, someone saw the post, a 19-year-old Bitcoin enthusiast using the online name Jerkos. Unlike most people, he wasn't focused on what Bitcoin was worth. He was curious about what Bitcoin could become. He agreed to the deal, using his own money. He ordered 2 large Papa John's pizzas. He arranged for them to be delivered to Laszlo's home. A short time later, the doorbell rang. 2 ordinary pizza boxes arrived. Nothing about the delivery looked historic. No cameras, no reporters, no celebration. Just a delivery driver, completing another routine order. But behind that ordinary delivery, something extraordinary was about to happen. For the first time in history, 2 people had agreed that Bitcoin could be exchanged for something real. The pizzas had arrived. Now, would the Bitcoin actually be sent? Money isn't defined by paper. It's defined by exchange. The pizzas arrived, 2 ordinary boxes, 1 ordinary delivery. Nothing about that afternoon looked unusual. There were no television cameras, no newspaper headlines, no cheering crowds, just a hungry programmer. Opening the front door, on the table, 2 large pizzas, waiting to be eaten. But before the first slice was taken, something far more important happened. Laszlo opened his computer. He prepared the payment. 10,000 Bitcoin. 1 final check. 1 click. The transaction was sent. Minutes later, it was confirmed by the network. The Bitcoin had changed hands. The pizzas had changed hands. For the first time in history, a decentralized digital currency had been exchanged for a real product. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a donation. It wasn't a technical experiment between developers. It was a voluntary trade. 2 people. Each believed they were receiving something of value. That simple agreement changed everything, because money doesn't become money. When someone creates it, it becomes money. When someone else accepts it. On May 22nd, 2010, Bitcoin crossed that line. The transaction was complete. The pizza was gone. But the world didn't even notice. History isn't changed by the size of a transaction. It's changed by what that transaction proves. The meal was over. The pizza was eaten. Life went on. Laszlo didn't celebrate. Jerkos didn't celebrate. No newspaper reported the story. No television station mentioned it. Wall Street never noticed. Governments never reacted. To almost everyone, nothing important had happened. But history often hides inside ordinary moments. That simple exchange had answered a question that had never been answered before. Could Bitcoin be used to buy something in the real world? For the first time, the answer was yes. Bitcoin was no longer just software. It was no longer just an experiment between programmers. It had become a working medium of exchange. From that moment forward, every person who accepted Bitcoin, every business that added Bitcoin payments, every online store, every cafe, every country that later recognized Bitcoin, was following the path opened by one simple purchase. The value of that day was never the pizzas. It was the proof that two strangers could create value without asking permission from a bank, a government, or anyone else. That was the moment Bitcoin stopped asking, "Can I become money?" and quietly began proving that it already was. Years later, the world would give that ordinary lunch an unforgettable name. The world's greatest revolutions often begin as ordinary moments. Today, every year on May 22nd, the Bitcoin community celebrates Bitcoin Pizza Day. Millions of people remember the story. They remember the 2 pizzas. They remember the 10,000 Bitcoin. And they wonder, what if Laszlo had never spent them? But that question misses the point. Without people willing to spend Bitcoin, there would have been no reason for anyone to accept it. Without acceptance, there would have been no market. Without a market, there would have been no global adoption. Laszlo Hanyecz didn't make a mistake. He performed an experiment that succeeded. Because of that single exchange, Bitcoin was no longer just an idea discussed by programmers. It became something people could use. That simple lunch helped transform Bitcoin from a digital curiosity into a global financial asset recognized around the world. Looking back, the pizzas were never the real story. The real story was the first moment 2 strangers trusted Bitcoin enough to exchange real value. And every Bitcoin transaction since then has followed the path they opened together. History remembers the pizzas, but history was really changed by the exchange. This wasn't the day someone bought lunch. It was the day Bitcoin proved it could become money. And sometimes, the future doesn't begin with a revolution. It begins with 2 pizzas. Next episode. Mt. Gox, the exchange that built and nearly broke Bitcoin.